Hey guys, I was just puttering around in the basement and rearranging things and kind of planning for the future, and I want to pose a question to y'all, which is not just what do you want to see. I've tried to do that before and I get responses like, do what you like. I appreciate that, but I could turn off the camera and do what I like just as well. So I also want to engage with the audience. I've gotten very specific questions that I shy away from, like how to use a very specific piece of equipment in conjunction with a very specific radio or TV chassis, which I also shy away from, because it's such a narrow focus. Now, I'll be the first to admit this is a very much a niche hobby to begin with. There are far fewer people working on restoring, collecting vintage TVs, let's say vintage radios or phonographs, or just about anything else for that matter. So I tend to try be a little bit broader and talk more generally about electronics or vintage electronics in general. But here's where I'm going with this. So I recently picked up an Admiral TV that I mentioned when I got it as a really good beginner set. So I was thinking about doing a tutorial series. I've been asked to do this a number of times. I did it with the Philco 90 radio, which I still have to finish the speaker on, but I did get the radio done. Where I went and started with the very basics and talked about the minimalist set of tools, and it was a multi-part series. I realize some people don't like the long multi-part series, but I try to mix things up. I try to do some videos where it's just start to finish one project, others multi-part, because I want to put out there some of the knowledge that I've gained over the last 40 odd years of tinkering with electronics before it's just gone. So TV, I've been asked a number of times to, hey, explain how this circuit works, what this circuit does. And since that's a really good set for beginners, not just, well, for a number of reasons, it's really spread out. It's easy to isolate certain circuits. Other sets, they really, like a portable set, they really pack things in, and there's circuits on top of circuits, and it's hard to point at something and say, this circuit does this. But the Admiral, I can. So not only can I explain what each circuit does, how it works, the design, the theory behind it, but also fix it and restore it as I'm going and impart some troubleshooting skills. So that's where I'm thinking of going with that. So I was curious what y'all thought about that. Because I know some people's reactions, it's another Admiral. Yeah, I've done a dozen of those over the last dozen years. But I figured here was an opportunity. Now, of course, I'm still going to be working on the RCA projection set. I'm hoping to get it inside this weekend. Fingers crossed. It's snowing right now. It was 80 degrees a week ago. Now it's 30 degrees. That's how it goes in the Midwest. But I need some help. I've made a lot of progress reorganizing things down here, but I still have a lot to do, and I have to get a bunch of customer sets done that I promised them that they would get done before Christmas. So that's where most of my focus is right now. But I'm always trying to think 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. So, in summary, my question to you is, does that appeal to you? Going through a multi-part series, we'll start with the power supply. Well, there's several power supplies in that, so we'll tackle each power supply on its own. We'll look at the capacitors, we'll talk about what to replace them with and so on, and then we'll move on to horizontal deflection circuit, vertical deflection circuit, tuner, RF, IF, high voltage, all that good stuff. Or I can just blow through it in a Friday night restoration if you want some instant gratification, so to speak. I'll leave you with one other thought, question, which I've thought about discussing for a while, so I figured now's a good time, which is, how do you all learn and how do you want to learn? I've come to realize over the years that my background and how I learned and how I ended up where I'm at is maybe not so typical. By that I mean I've been doing this a long time. I started at a young age. I memorized the register color code probably by the time I was 10. My parents, I was very lucky they bought me, I don't know, I couldn't tell you how I got started in it, but early on I got all-in-one electronics kits from Radio Shack or wherever. And I started tinkering as soon as far back as I can remember. And I built model railroads, and I was making my own controllers for the speed and the switching the tracks and whatnot. And then I got more and more into electronics over the years. By the time I was in college, I kind of thought I knew it all. Maybe a little arrogant, but 4 years of electronics shop in high school, so it was very much hands-on, but I was also going to Hamfest by then. Usually for most of the classes I took, I already knew a lot of the material that was being covered. I read everything I get my hands on. I tore everything I get my hands on apart. I did not have a mentor, is what I'm getting at. I did not apprentice. Nobody trained me, nobody taught me. But I get the impression that is how a lot of other folks learned. They worked at a TV shop, they apprenticed, they had a mentor, they had an Elmer, I guess was the old term. I didn't have any of that. I don't want to go as far as say as I taught myself, but wherever I could, be it school or magazines or books or ham fests or radio clubs, wherever and whenever I could get info, I devoured it. Now, of course, there's the internet and YouTube. I mean, it's just so much information out there. So when I get asked questions like, somebody wants to replace a selenium rectifier, and they just ask me, what value resistor should I use? I don't like to just say 10 ohms, 5 watts. I like to say, why do you think you need to add one? What do you think you should use? In other words, think about it. Learn from the experience. I've tried to teach a few people who have reached out to me and said, oh, I have a radio I'd like to get working. And I invited them over, and it turned out that they really didn't know anything. And in a few hours, I cannot teach somebody how a radio works and how to fix it. That's not going to happen if you don't know much of anything to start out with. Now, I'm also not going to start off with teaching Ohm's law and equivalent circuits and stuff like that. So I'm trying to strike a happy medium of keep it interesting, show you some cool stuff, but also try to impart some knowledge. Go cliche, teach a man to fish or whatever, that kind of thinking. Yeah, I could just throw out an answer and you'd say, yeah, use 10 ohms because that's just what you do. But I would hope that at least some of you want to know why. Why do I need to add a resistor when I replace a selenium rectifier, or do I? Maybe in some cases you don't. Maybe in some cases you do, and the value is not always going to be the same. The wattage isn't always going to be the same. And there's plenty of other instances like that. So I'm trying to strike a happy balance, and whatever feedback I can get from you guys would be of great value. I could break out a chalkboard and I can start throwing up some lengthy equations, but I don't think anybody wants that, including myself. But I would like to talk at least a little bit about some of the reasoning and theory, or why you do some of this stuff, not just you do it because I say so, you do it to get this result, and these are the parts that are available nowadays. Then that, if you want it to work reliably and safely, XYZ, that kind of thing. Here's kind of my motivation for doing this little soapbox talk here too. A while ago there was a discussion that opened up on Facebook and on one of the vintage TV groups of somebody saying that the guys who had experience and had knowledge were arrogant jerks. They weren't sharing the knowledge. They were rude. They didn't want to help anybody. There was a lot of backlash to that too. So I'm not entirely sure where that came from. But I can tell you this. I have seen, not to point any fingers or criticize anybody, but I have seen plenty of folks hop onto the forums, somebody young, enthusiastic, new to the group, and say, hey, I found this great old TV on Craigslist or whatever. I want to get it running. And they immediately start talking about dim bulb testers and swapping out tubes and this and that. And then usually somebody will chime in and say, hang on, what's your experience level? Have you ever worked on tube equipment before? Have you ever worked on a radio before? And usually the answer is no. Minimal experience, minimal knowledge. And so very often the advice is, well, hang on there. Slow down. What equipment do you have? If you don't have any, and you don't have much knowledge or skills, you should really ask yourself, what do you really want out of this? Because if what you want is just a cool old TV you can show off to your friends and that's it, I really think you'd be better off buying a restored set or having somebody else work on it. I mean, by all means, please join the community, get involved, learn. But keep in mind, it's not a casual thing you're just going to knock off in a weekend, pick up a soldering iron on Amazon and go at it. No, you don't need all this stuff. Absolutely not. But you may need some stuff. And you may run into some problems that require some specialized equipment or parts that are hard to get. The easy one being a pitcher tube. A little hard to come by. So you got to ask yourself, yeah, maybe you get the TV for $10. How much do you want to spend, both money and time-wise, to get it working, knowing that you might fail? And not because of anything to do with you. Sometimes maybe there's just a part bad that you can't get. Or it's not worth the money it's going to cost to get all the parts you're going to need. When I first got my first vintage TV, I realized I was in over my head, and I worked on radios for about 10 years before I got back to TVs. I'm not saying you need to take 10 years out, but that's just my personal path. I got an RCA 630 TS. I got a Predictor very early on, and I started poking around, and I realized I did not really know what I was doing beyond checking tubes and clipping out capacitors, so I stopped. I joined forums, I watched YouTube videos, I read service manuals until I felt more comfortable, and I worked on a bunch of other sets before I dove into Predictors. So, yeah, I don't want to imply that you can't do it or you shouldn't do it. Just be aware it's not necessarily the easiest thing to just dive into. I would strongly recommend do some radios first. Basically, all the techniques and skills are applicable to both, but there's just more of everything in a TV. And more tubes, more circuits, more parts, more voltage. So I would love more people to get involved in the community and it to become a bigger thing. But yeah, anyways. So I drifted off a bit towards the end there. So I would love to hear your feedback, because that's all I have to go on. I can do anything I want that I enjoy doing as much. I can be extremely self-indulgent. Like I said, I can just turn the camera off and just go do whatever I want to do. But if I'm going to spend the time and effort to make videos, I want to make sure that I'm at least connecting with some of you. And I'm perfectly happy to go through some of the basics. It's good for me. It's always great to review fundamentals anyways. At this point, like I predicted, I could just practically close my eyes and clip out the parts and just solder everything, hook everything back up, and turn it on. And more often than not, it works okay. But you and I aren't really learning much when we do that, are we? So I think it could be a lot of fun and interesting to go through nuts and bolts. But yeah, it's a boring 10-inch black and white Admiral TV. So if that interests you guys, if you want to see a 15-part series on restoring a classic, basic late 40s black and white TV, let me know. Kind of drifted off there towards the end. It's been on my mind for a long time to throw this topic out there. As I say, I can just be extremely self-indulgent and just keep jumping between projects and work on whatever I feel like working. But I do know I've gotten some feedback from some of you that they don't really enjoy that. I totally understand you. I've been working on some of these projects for more than 10 years. I mean, I can't imagine anybody still following along and remembers where I left off. I can't really either. But I want to make sure that I'm making the best use of my time and you guys are getting enjoyment out of it. So whether it's the whiteboard or soldering or going freehand with the camera and just poking around with the set I just picked up, you know, I can do all that stuff. But I was thinking it might be a really worthwhile experience for all of us for me to do a 15-part plus series on a TV start to finish in really detail of a classic late 40s black and white TV and just get it all out there. So please let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Thanks for watching.